Venice. Okay.
Thank you.
We are happy to have you here with us, Mr. Smith, in Venice. Rusty Smith is an associated professor, the chair of the program of architecture, associated director of the Rural Studio, and the coordinator of the first year program in Auburn University School of Architecture in Alabama. He's also taught and lectured as a distinguished visiting artist at the School of Art Institute of Chicago in the Department of Architecture, Interior Architecture, and Designed Objects. He is a nationally recognized teacher and a scholar, and he has received numerous awards, including the 2005 American Institute of Architects National Teaching Honor Award and the 2003 American Institute of Architecture Students National Teaching Honor Award. Smith is currently an independent consultant specializing in life safety, health, and human welfare. He's practiced professionally since 1921. So, welcome, Mr. Smith. You can start your presentation now.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me join you today. It's really happy to be here and to talk a few minutes about the work of the Rural Studio. Hopefully, most folks, when we're fortunate that most folks typically know a little bit about Rural Studio, especially if they're in the architecture business. But folks very often come at it from very different directions, from their various areas of interest, because there's a lot of different kinds of work that we're involved in. So today, you guys had asked me to speak specifically about our housing affordability work, and I'll try to focus on that. But it is important to understand that work is a sort of a piece of a larger profile of work that we're engaged in rural West Alabama. So to kind of start off, it's always important to talk about what Rural Studio is, and it's one way to do that is to actually talk about what it's not. Rural Studio is not a construction firm, and it's not an architecture firm, and it's not an architecture school. It's actually much more specific than that. The Rural Studio is really a piece of a piece of a piece of a thing. So the big thing that Rural Studio is a piece of is Auburn University, which is a medium-sized land grant polytechnic institution located in Alabama in the United States. We have about 28,000 students in the whole university. That university is broken into 13 colleges. We are a part of the College of Architecture, Design, and Construction. In that college, it's broken into 3 schools: the School of Building Science, the School of Industrial and Graphic Design, and the School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. We are located in the School of Architecture, in the program of architecture, and we're a piece of that program of architecture. Our architecture program is a 5-year undergraduate program. So at the end of 5 years, our students graduate and they have the credential to go out and seek licensure and practice as a licensed architect in the United States. As part of that 5-year program, our students are able to spend part of their time away from campus in Hale County, Alabama, participating in the Rural Studio. So our students will be in Hale County in Rural Studio from anywhere from 1 semester, that's 15 weeks here, to anywhere up to 1 year to maybe even 1.5 years, designing and building projects in rural West Alabama. So the part of the architecture program that Rural Studio sits in is we're a design build program. What that means is that students design and actually build the projects that they work on. The program was started around just a handful of really simple ideas. One was that the best way to learn how to do things is by actually doing them. The second thing is that if you don't know how to do something, the best way that you can do that is to do it together. So the program is remarkably collaborative. The students work together on the projects. They work together with us as faculty. They work together with our consultants, and they certainly work together with our clients and neighbors in our community that we serve. The final part of why Rural Studio was created by our founders, Samuel Mockbee and DK Ruth, now almost 25 years ago, was maybe not a little more profound than that, but equally kind of straightforward. Sambo, he coined this phrase that he referred to as citizen architect, and he said that architects should really be both professionals and citizens. And for him, it was important that he put that word citizen first. What he meant by that is that he began to imagine and understand the professional responsibility that architects had in the world as neighbors in a place where they lived and as professionals. So examples that we often give to describe what he meant by that, we often recognize doctors and lawyers and other folks like that as professionals, and so we can use them as examples. If we think about lawyers here in the United States, the right to equal representation is ensconced in our Constitution. So everyone, no matter whether they have financial means to pay a lawyer or not, is guaranteed the right to representation in the legal system. It's a professional responsibility that the legal system has. If we think about doctors, a doctor, if they're driving down the road and they see a car accident on the side of the road, they can't stop and check their watch to see if they have time to stop and help. And they can't stop and check and see if the person who might be injured has insurance. They have a professional responsibility to help when they see folks in crisis. And Sambo would often say that if architecture and architects are going to elevate to the level of professionalism of other professionals, they have to kind of understand that obligation to act when they see people in crisis. And so that's what we try to do in our service area. So we are in the United States. We're actually located in Alabama, which is in the southeastern part of the United States. It's a warm, humid, subtropical area of the country. This is sort of what it looks like. It's very rural. It's very agricultural. And it has sort of a long history of a place that still of sort of really great wealth, but also of absolute abject poverty. So we have about a 4 to 5 county area of operation where we serve people. Those counties that we work here in the United States are considered to be what we call, what the federal government refers to as being persistently impoverished. What that means is that
Are you
20%,
the slides?
20%.
Mr. Smith, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I'm seeing the slides because we are always seeing the first slide in there.
Oh, there's no slides advancing.
No,
Okay,
we are just
let me
the
see.
first.
Do you see a different slide now?
Yeah, no. Yeah, we see it now.
Okay, so I'm gonna. So clearly the presentation's not going to run, but I'll just click through the slides, and you'll kind of see everything else. I'll go back really quickly. This is obviously the United States. Alabama here is in the southeast of the United States. This is it's a very agricultural, rural place. This is typical of what it looks like. We do have great wealth, but then we also have a significant number of our population of our neighbors who live in real poverty. Those persistently impoverished counties that I was talking about, what that means, that definition is 20% or more of the population that lives in that county have lived consistently and persistently in poverty for 30 years or more. There's about 270 or 280 of those counties in the United States. About 85% of them are rural. In Hale County, which is our center of operation, 24 to 25% of the total county population lives in poverty. When you begin to look at populations, people of color. We have a large African American population in Hill County. It's typically about 90% of that population that lives in poverty. When you begin to look at childhood poverty, about 85% of the children that live in Hill County are in poverty. And that's going to be pretty typical throughout these persistently impoverished counties that we work. So this picture that I had originally showed you is this was a house that Shepard and Alberta Bryant, one of our very first clients 25 years ago, was living in. The truth is that not many people live in those tar paper shacks anymore. Almost 25 years later, almost all of those are gone. But this product, the kind of second and third hand manufactured trailer home, really has become the quote unquote competition for our housing product. This is really what we're competing against. So like I said, I told you that all of our work is designed and built by students as part of their architectural education. We think they're special, but in reality they're just like architecture students anywhere else. They're just like you that are sitting there today. They're all somewhere between 18, 19 years old and 21, 22 years old. When they come out to Hale County, one of the first things they'll do is they'll begin to do what we refer to as neck down work. So what that means is they'll instead of using just thinking about using their brains like they do like we do in university all the time, they actually begin to use their bodies and to begin to learn and think out loud with their hands. This particular group of students, one of their tasks is we were donated a barn, and they were tasked with taking that barn down, collecting all the material, sorting the material, and beginning to understand what they might begin to use that material for in a project. If you've ever, a lot of us have grown up sort of taking things apart. One of the ways that you can learn how to put something together is to take it apart, right? And so that's one of the ideas behind this project. Those students, like all of our students, they were introduced to a client. Her name was Rosalie Turner. Rosalie was living in a home that was falling down around her, she had two adult sons that had been dislocated and were living elsewhere in the community. So the students here, they're meeting with Rosalie, beginning to understand her housing needs, what she's looking for, and what she needs to get her family back together. We also work with a lot of consultants. We have a variety of consultants that come in, architects, engineers, those sorts of things. Happens to be Glenn Murcutt, who came in on his last trip to the United States. Every week, we're fortunate enough to have architects and engineers like here. This is Anderson Inge working with our students who come in and help the students kind of understand the problems that they're dealing with. The students in the process, they don't just design the work, they begin to understand every bit of how the buildings that they've designed are constructed, how they're assembled, how they're put together. And then they very quickly begin, get out in the world and actually begin to build these projects. So you can see here the White House. That's Rosalie Turner's house that she was living in. The idea that the students had was that they would keep Rosalie in place and build her new house right in front of her old house. So she shelters in place in her existing house. When the new house is finished, she can move into that house. So this is the house in initial construction. This is the house about halfway through as the students are beginning to work through finished materials. This is the house as it was finished on the day that Rosalie and her family moved in. So the materials, the interior materials that you can see here actually came from that barn that you saw earlier, the students taking down. You can see the house has a beautiful front porch. Those front porches, sort of a cultural condition and social condition that's prevalent in the South. All of our buildings, whether they're houses or public buildings, they'll all will feature, sort of a very significant front porch in the project. The second part of the project, so here you can see the platform behind the first part of the house that the students built that got Rosalie and her son sort of moved into the front pod. The students then came and built a second wing of the house that allowed her sons to kind of expand out into their own bedrooms. So that's kind of how we work. That's how we work with the students, working with clients, learning what the clients need, understanding, sort of the housing needs that our clients have and what have you. The way that works traditionally at Rural Studio is sort of one client, one house at a time. And about 13 or 14 years ago, we began to wonder about, could we begin to think about all that the students, the research and understanding that the students had developed, could we actually begin to think about housing products that we could design that other constituents could actually deliver that didn't require our intervention? Could we basically provide all of the information for in another area that another organization could actually provide those houses? So again, this is really the competition. It's these trailer homes, and they are pretty tough competition. They're inexpensive to purchase. You can get one really fast. You can literally see one today, and you can be living in it tomorrow. Just like buying an automobile, you can go to a lot and see it. You don't have to just look at drawings and pictures that architects have made. And there's sort of, I guess, a sort of a diverse product line of what you can get. You can get white ones and brown ones and white ones and blue ones and white ones and red ones, I guess. So there's a little bit of diversity in the product. Our idea was a little bit different from that. We began to think about this project that we've called the 20K house for a number of years. It was really pretty straightforward. A couple of simple premises. We were looking to develop beautiful, well-designed houses that are both affordable and actually can create an industry of home building. So that workforce development component was really important. We want people to be able to live within their means. So understanding what that means from an affordable standpoint is really important. And that we also wanted others to be able to deliver the house that, didn't require our intervention. So the house was really began to look at, what the overall monthly cost of a home might be, and begin to think about what a homeowner that was living, sort of at a income rate in our area might actually be able to afford. 14 years ago, that was a monthly mortgage of about $108, and that's really where that $20,000 number came from. What would a $108 mortgage a month buy, right? So it's a really kind of a conceptual argument. Because we weren't looking at sort of a straight charity gift, the students said, well, we have to understand what kind of material costs and then conceptually what a labor cost might be. So the students then broke the project into two pieces of $8,000 in labor and $12,000 in materials. So it really began to be, what could you do with that? And they began to understand that for $8,000, if you had a contractor and 3 laborers over a period of 3 months, really actually could begin to generate a relatively significant amount of job opportunity in Hale County. So just in Hale County alone, with a small 1-bedroom house, we could, just replacing the substandard 1-bedroom homes, that would service about 31% of our population. Contractor building these homes could make about $60,000 a year, and a laborer could make about $22,000 a year. Now that may not sound like a whole lot of money, here in the United States, but that we have to understand when these numbers, when the students put these numbers together, 13 or 14 years ago, the median income in Hale County was only about $18,500. So the first thing the students did was begin to look at what could you do, what could you really build for $12,500 of material. And so these are examples of those first houses. There was Elizabeth's house, there was Frank's house, and then there was what the students referred to as the 32K truss house. So even then they were beginning to look at, well, if you had a little bit more money, could you, instead of just building a 1-bedroom, could you build a 2-bedroom and those sorts of things. The students then, after sort of looking at sort of what you could do with that amount of material, they begin to say, well, if you actually begin to sort of do more custom designed homes and different types of construction, and focused on an even smaller home, could you have some opportunities to bring different materials in and things like that? So a group of students designed and built what they referred to as the pattern book house. It was a modular home that could be site adjusted for particular site circumstances. A group of 4 students designed and built a 2-story home. So begin to think about even sort of a smaller footprint, but what happens if you move vertically. Another group of 4 students began to look at commercial construction opportunities using all steel construction. And then another group of students worked on a project that they referred to as the kind of the 0 mile home, which actually began to look at materials that could, at least for the structural components of the house, begin to look at materials that could be procured from the site itself. From there, the next groups of students began to take those lessons that were learned and begin to say, well, what could, not just what could Rural Studio build, but what could others actually begin to build? Could we take those lessons learned and to begin to design a proposed product line of houses? And that's where, the Dave's house was one of the first products that came out of that. And I should back up and say all of these houses, the names of the houses are all named after the first client who actually moved into the house. So Dave's house was really the first product line house. MacArthur's house was the second. Joanne's house was the third, all looking at different ways that you could begin to organize a 1-bedroom home and that built around different ways people live, even in a small home. After developing that product line, the next groups of students came in 2012 and 2013. They began to look at, well, what about issues of accessibility? Could we actually begin to design houses that were specifically targeted at issues of aging in place and sheltering in place? That became really important. Eddie's house was the first house that we actually built on grade. We don't do that a lot in our area just because of some of the soil and rain issues that we have, but building on grade does actually, sort of building right on the ground actually does have some significant bring some positive assets to the project relative to issues of accessibility. We then, following groups of students began to look at 2-bedroom homes. Was in that range, there was Sylvia's house, Bobby's house, Idela's house, and then Michelle's house, all sort of looking at different conditions. And this is in this one, in Michelle's house, it's probably kind of interesting to note. You'll see very often these houses are considered replacement homes, just like you saw in that Rose Lee, where we built the house right in front of her falling down house that she was living here. Here, this picture was taken before Michelle's trailer was taken away, but you can see the same strategy was deployed here, where Michelle was living in this substandard, underperforming trailer house. The new house was built right in front of it, and then the trailer would have been taken away. So this is just a good photo to see this sort of replacement model that we're working in. Geraldine's house was also a 2-bedroom house. And then Buster's house was one that was just recently built in 2017. This is actually the first 2-bedroom house that we've sort of brought into the product line. And we're actually, I'll talk about that in a second. We're working with some partners to deliver this house. Rural Studio is not building it. Other partners are building it for clients of their own. We also began to, one group of students in 2017 also began to look at, this was referred to as Johnny May's house, but it's really kind of an income house. So it goes back to look at that 32K truss house idea, where you have the main part of the house here to the left, where the family lives, and then you have what we refer to as a dog trot in the middle, this sort of covered porch, and then a second little smaller unit to the right, which could be used for a family member to live in. It could be used to generate rental income. The family could run a home-based business out of it. Really begin to look at how you could begin to aggregate income for a family. So that's kind of the process that we've run through in the development of the house. If you're involved in housing affordability issues, anything that you're doing are going to meet these criteria. They're going to be durable, resilient. They're going to be buildable, constructible. They're going to be weatherproof, and they're going to be secure. Anybody that's working in the housing affordability business, whatever you're doing, that's the floor you stand on. That's what has to happen. Additionally, though, we think that just because houses may not cost a lot of money up front, as they're designed, architects bring a lot of value to these projects, because you have to be able to, the houses have to have a sense of presence. They have to foster a sense of community through their particular design decisions. They have to contribute directly to the health and welfare of the occupant. They have to provide extended levels of accommodation. We talked about that sort of ability to age in place and shelter in place are important. And even though that they may not cost a lot of money, and they're using readily available materials and local labor and those sorts of things to build, they still have to, right? So all of those things are important. So we've got 22, 23 different prototypes that we've developed, and the steps that we're working through now with the house is really, as I've sort of mentioned, but I want to talk specifically about that, is really move from this research and development that Rural Studio has engaged in for 25 years now, where we develop projects and then give them to our clients who need them, to really begin to understand how we can take these products, and in this case, particularly the housing products, and actually provide them to a larger audience in different markets. So we've done a number of things. We've developed, we've made sure that our product line houses meet all relevant codes and standards. They meet lending standards and insurability requirements. They can get through zoning. We've thought about energy and life cycle performance and all those sorts of things. And we're now providing different procurement providers, people who provide homes for affordable homes for families in different areas of the United States. We're giving them kind of traditional construction documents and technical assistance so that they can begin to do that. This is a couple of the very first homes that we did that with. These were built not in Alabama, they were built in Georgia. And this is the exterior of the home's front, and this is the back, and then you can see the interiors, and then there's the front again. We learned this was a pair of homes, obviously, that was built together, that sort of shared, sort of some connectivity resources. We began to learn really quickly that just providing traditional construction documents didn't go as far enough to communicate to a builder, a contractor, exactly all the things they need to know to make sure that the houses performed the way they did. In other words, when we give construction documents, no matter how detailed they are to a contractor, they tell the builder what to build, but they don't necessarily tell the builder how to build it, or even more importantly, why it's built that way. So beginning to understand that one of the roles that architects have to play is not just in the design, but really in the communication of why it's a building, or in this case, a home, is built the way it is extraordinarily important. So we're in the process of putting together not just a construction set of documents, but an instruction set of documents that cover the whole range of home procurement. One of the easiest ways that we describe to people what that means, everybody's kind of familiar with this sort of IKEA idea, where you can have a really sort of clear set of instructions, a kit of materials, and a couple of funny little tools that they give you, and then anybody, no matter what kind of skills they have, can actually become a pretty competent furniture builder at the end of the day. So we can do that with the house, as we mentioned earlier. We know everything about what goes in, how the house is constructed, the assembly that goes into it. We know the assembly process, how the process of the project. And we've begun to develop these sort of instructional documents that I can just click through a couple of example pages from, that actually begin to show exactly how to build the house, very particular ways, and begin to communicate why building the house in these particular ways are so important. So hopefully you can see some of that stuff. So that's really what the project has been about. But the project has really grown in some ways to really think about what the problem is. This idea of reframing the problem. Housing affordability in the United States, and I have to assume it's the same all over the world, is really not a brick and mortar problem. It's not an issue of do you design the house this way, or you design the house that way, and all of a sudden you save a lot of money. In some ways, we think even here we're asking not necessarily the wrong question, but not the best question. So we always get caught up with the question of what does a house cost? And what that means is we think about, what does the house cost to build? What's the initial cost of the house? But if we're truly thinking about affordability, we don't often enough ask the question, not just what does the house cost, but what does the house afford? What does the house afford the homeowner? And that's really what we're beginning to do. We're beginning to look at those second costs, the life cycle costs of the house, and actually beginning to understand how they begin to make the home more affordable. So we're looking very closely at the intersection of energy, resiliency, wellness, and workforce development. So because these projects are mortgaged, right? A client takes a mortgage out on a product, understanding how mortgages work is really important. So what we know is if a client has, and this is sort of the numbers from a particular client that we're working with right now, they have $350 of living expenses. So food, gas in their car payment, all the sorts of just daily living sort of expenses. They would have a mortgage of about $230. Utilities would cost about $150, and insuring the house would cost about $60. So what we know is that if we can take $1, if we can save $1 in energy, that doesn't sound like much. But if we can take that $1 from that $150 cost and actually move it into the category of mortgage, don't just put it in the pocket to as extra spending, but move it into the mortgage. That monthly mortgage payment, that $1 actually buys $200 of construction, right? So all of a sudden, every dollar that we can save in energy, which doesn't sound like much, through the power of interest, actually compounds to turn into quite a bit of money. So how does that manifest itself? So this is a project, and I'm almost wrapped up, but just so you know, but this is a project that has just been under construction. It's a house almost complete, and this is the house about a week and a half ago when the client actually moved into it. This is a house that we worked with Habitat for Humanity here, and we also built it to extraordinarily high performance criteria. So the house is built to both the passive performance criteria. It's the highest energy performance criteria you can build a residential single-family home to here in the United States. And it's also built to what we refer to as fortified gold construction, which is the highest resiliency standard, which is a structural standard that's designed to withstand hurricane force winds, blowing rain, and hail. So it makes the house really strong. This house was built to both of those standards, which was, if you have some questions about that, I can talk more about it. It was really complicated to build this little house to both of those standards, and we learned a lot of interesting things about it. But why this matters, and I'll go back to this model. So if we look at these real numbers for this client, if you see they have a total, what we would refer to as a kind of this is what we refer to as their monthly burn. This is how much money this client spends total, $350 for sort of living expenses, and then she has $460 of expenses that are directly tied to the cost of homeownership. So beginning to not just think about how we can reduce the cost of the house, which ultimately would just reduce that mortgage cost, we can begin to think a little differently. And you can begin to see that if we can actually reduce the utility cost, in this case, because we've built this house to this energy standard, you can see we've reduced the utilities from $150 to $35 a month. And because we've built to this higher resiliency standard, we've reduced the insurance cost pretty significantly per month. You can see that the mortgage cost that was $250, right? So when you add all those things up, they equal a totally $460. What you can see is that, well, because of these quote unquote upgrades of the house, it made the house cost more. Now the mortgage is $343, but you can actually see that her overall total cost of home ownership is actually $34 a month less. So beginning to connect these things together are extraordinarily important to begin to think about how we can think about affordability different. If we can begin to think about the total cost of home ownership, connect these things together, we can actually save the client money and not just put them in a better house, but put them in a house that is worth more, which is really important to the financial institution, the bank that writes the mortgage, and actually save her money on top of that. So we're working with some very substantial and significant partners here to do this. Obviously, you have to begin to work across domains, from the financial and the mortgage industry to the insurance industry to the healthcare industry. These are some of the partners that we're working here in the United States to actually begin to connect and tie these products and ideas together into kind of holistic products of home delivery that include healthcare products, mortgage products, insurance products, and a house product that are all linked together to make the house more affordable overall. So that's what I got. Hopefully that's not too long, and I'm happy to take your questions if you got them.
Okay, Mr. Smith, before we going to the questions, I would like to thank you for your enriching lectures and even more the process of thinking and analysis and development that you show us. So we can now move to the questions.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks. Sure, you're welcome. Thanks.
Hello, Mr. Smith. Thank you for your presentation. I have a bit of a funny question.
I like funny questions.
One of my architecture professors, Billy Faircloth, would always ask us, what is a construction system? And sort of remind us that as architecture students, we need to come up with our own definition of what a construction system is, where we draw the system boundary, and what are its constituent elements. So I'd like to ask you, what is a construction system?
Thanks. That's a great question. Hopefully that we'll be able to talk a little bit about that, and you can sort of see our boundaries extend extraordinarily far out away from building, and actually include folks in that design process of understanding the system well beyond the boundaries of architects. I can maybe give you a different example. If I gave a broader presentation, you may know that Rural Studio is involved in a lot of different kinds of projects that beyond just houses. So we've designed schools, healthcare facilities, libraries, meeting facilities for communities, business facilities for communities. We even designed and built a fire station. And so if we're focused on thinking about the system of home design and procurement, why in the world are we doing all of that other stuff? Well, the fire station is probably the best way to sort of talk about the extents of that system. Why, if we're focused on providing affordable housing, why do we build a fire station? Well, without fire protection, your house burns down. If your house burns down with no recourse, you can't get insurance on your home. If you can't get insurance on your home, you can't get a mortgage on your home. You can't get a mortgage on your home. You can't buy a home that's titled as real property. And so you wind up having to actually live in personal property, which is like a trailer home, right? And so the system of home procurement, it extends well beyond the building construction envelope. That's what we typically think about that system to be. Understanding what the real problem is extraordinarily important, right? In the case that I just gave you, the problem was not that the house cost too much. It was the problem of no matter what it cost, you couldn't get it insured. So how could we begin to look at that larger system and say, well, how can we help get a house insured? It wasn't a brick and mortar problem. It was a fire protection problem in that case. And so suddenly that unlocked housing affordability without any change to the design of the houses at all. Having that fire station in the community unlocked home affordability for many, many, many people that lived in that community. So to Billy's credit, I would say just knowing that there is a system that, you know, buildings aren't just things, but they exist within a constellation of other things that are connected in invisible but really important ways. Beginning to understand those systems of connection are really important. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a fantastic answer.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Hello, Mr. Smith. I have a question about materiality. For example, you are working in America, and I know that you have a really good experience about wood, and it is all the projects about is built with wood elements, I see. So for the affordable housing and sustainability, what do you see about the wood and future of the wood? For example, you are building always one-story, two-story buildings, and what is going to be a high-rise building in a long term for a mass housing, for example, for the people who is poor and unaffording even a single housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a good question too. Yeah, we do build with wood, and while we and it's great that I've actually got a picture here with a pile of wood with our students there for this question. So we're Alabama is a historically agricultural place. We used to grow cotton and all sorts of things. Now the number one agricultural crop that we grow is wood. We grow a lot of dimensional lumber in telephone poles, quite frankly, in Alabama. So wood is a really important product for us. It's a local material, it's a sustainable material, and that you know, sort of building with the things that you find right where you are is really important. So that's really why we build with wood. The questions about wood are really good because there are, like all materials, it's a resource, and while we think of it as an infinitely renewable resource, you know, it is a resource that is easy to deplete. And so one of the things that's happened even in our area as we build with wood, the quality of the wood is getting less and less and less. It used to, you know, that dimensional lumber that you see stacked behind the students, that any one of those pieces of dimensional lumber, those 2x4s, about historically would have taken about 40 years to grow. Today, we're getting that wood out of the ground really, really fast. You know, we have advanced growing techniques and those sorts of things that in some ways are great because we can get this sort of sustainable product out of the ground faster with less resources. But the quality of but what happens is the quality of the material suffers. We're getting these. We're getting a 2x4 out of a tree now in about 18 years. So less than half the time of the natural growth system. So it means that the lumber is not as dimensionally stable as it used to be. It's not as structurally strong as it used to be. Just in the last 10 years, we've had to re-engineer even a number of our 1 and 2 story buildings. As we've gone to build that same building again, they've had to be completely re-engineered using more lumber, which just exacerbates the problem. So some of the things, you know, we'll keep building out of wood again because it's a local product and it's going to be a local product for our foreseeable lifetime in Alabama. We're beginning to look at a lot of engineered products, and certainly, you know, if you're even halfway paying attention to architecture today, you know that CLT, cross-laminated timber, is a product that it seems like everyone seems to think is going to save the world. I don't know if that's the case, but we're doing a fair amount of CLT experimentation and applied research, and we're working directly with some of the best in the business. We're working with Kilmo and his group to begin to do some of that work. So to the real studio over the next several years, you'll begin to see some of that work coming out of the studio. Some of the things we're really excited about, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is some of the new techniques of wood construction are actually allowing us to rethink building performance, not just in a structural standpoint, but also as a sort of an energy standpoint, as well as a healthcare standpoint. Beginning to think about how building with, sort of more complete natural products, to begin to think about how a building might ventilate and how it might be cooled and heated naturally again using these products is a really high value research target for us. So I think, there's one of the questions about when you build, if you build larger buildings, how do you build larger buildings? How do you build wood? We're approaching that through the use of engineered products and CLT products. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the answer. I was about to ask about the CLT and the other laminated timbers, but you have already answered it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, stay tuned. We hope we got a project coming out of the ground right now, which is a really, really innovative CLT project that I think if it works the way it's supposed to work, I think folks will be really interested.
Yeah, and also in the other hand, it raises the price actually. What about that? And also you are a bit losing the locality because you need to go to the industrial areas to create a laminated timber, for example.
Well, that's a great observation. That's currently, and I'm not at too much liberty to talk about it, but what I can tell you is some of the products that we're developing using CLT actually don't require industrialization and actually can be built by a local workforce, very, very local to where the actual construction is. That's one of the pieces of applied research that we're that we're working with Keel and his folks at McGill University on. So yeah, stay tuned. I think we're gonna have a good answer about that. Whether we're talking about wood or anything else, the whole industrialization of building products, while has a lot of great opportunities, there's a lot of we do a lot of modularization and pre-manufacturing and things like that, but it offers challenges too. Anytime you begin to industrialize a process, construction process or otherwise, or rely on a factory to build that, to make a material or make an assembly, that's a job that can be outsourced. And if you remember, that means that's a job that can go someplace else out of the community. And if you remember, I'm going to scroll back and get a slide up here. If you remember, one of the very first tenets here of our affordable housing project is this sort of, develop beautiful high performance houses, but it's also support an industry of home building across the rural South. In these underserved, impoverished communities, there are so few dollars in these communities. And if we can only do one thing, people always ask us, you could do one thing in that community, what would you do? What would be the number one thing you can do? And the answer is to do whatever you can to keep the dollars that are there. The dollars in a community, in our communities, they go outside the community for everything, for housing, for healthcare, for education, for food, for energy, for everything. So any way we can keep those dollars there are important. So industrialization, we're never in these kind of underserved communities, we're never going to build big factories and industries. So if we rely solely on those industrial processes just to drive the cost of a product down, there's not going to be anybody in that community that will have a job to be able to afford it, no matter how much you drive the cost down. So understanding workforce development and costs of things, again, that's part of that system that you can't uncouple, is really important. So site-built homes, built out of local material, jobs that can't be exported, really important to us in that system of how we think about the houses designed and procured. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm really satisfied actually for your answer. and I'm going to my friends.
Hello, Mr. Smith. I have a question about the educational aspect of the rural studio, actually, because that kind of practice in school lets students to learn on site, which brings a shift in education that is being much more practical rather than stick on the theoretical side. So do you think that that kind of contribution, what kind of contribution will it bring to our society's problems in terms of housing or creating communities?
Thank you for the question. Well, we hope that it has a significant impact on our students and what they go on to do, certainly in their future, and I think it has. And I'll back into that, maybe a little bit of that in a second, but talk about it in a kind of a broader way. And a thing that's probably really important to know about the Rural Studio. When I showed you this sort of picture of our students, and I said, there's nothing really special about them. They're great. They're awesome. Our students are spectacular. So much fun to work with, and all. But what I mean when there's nothing special or magic about them, there's nothing that's really magic that happens about we go out to West Alabama and then all of a sudden they're just normal architecture students, and then they do this wonderful work. Our whole 5-year program is based on preparing the students to do this work. So we actually do a lot of this kind of work on campus. We do a lot of hands-on work, a lot of client-driven work, a lot of service-oriented work. Whether the projects ever get built by clients or for clients or not, we still focus a tremendous amount on the work. So Rural Studio is not a separate and distinct thing from our architecture program. It's just a really public-facing image of what the whole program is about. So we do a lot of that. You talked about that it's a real practical experience. That's what our whole Auburn University is about. It's a land grant institution, and that may not be that notion might not be familiar in other parts of the world. But when our land grant institutions were created back in the 19th century, they were really created to build knowledge, but with the intention of actually sharing that knowledge with the public directly. So we have this sort of in helping the places where the universities existed, helping the people that lived in that area live better lives. So we're directly connected to that mission of the entire university. There's at the very beginning, I talked about this, how important it was to learn how to do things by actually doing them. We all know that university is about creating knowledge, right? And when students come to Auburn, they do that, right? They both learn things and they create new knowledge, right? But there's also this other kind of important thing, particularly when you're in a professional discipline where you're going to go out and practice. It's what we just refer to as know-how. And so this kind of hands-on experiential learning just takes that knowledge that students have already developed. You have to be in some ways deeply immersed in the theoretical to be able to do this work. And then it's sort of beginning to transfer that theoretical knowledge that you've developed into this sort of know-how where you just know how to do things. Again, that's a system that can't be uncoupled. It's not a this or a that, that those things work completely hand in hand. So we've got a graduate program we've just started at Rural Studio. It's actually takes this work that the students doing, and it actually prepares them for professional life outside of school to begin to do this work in the U.S. And I assume it's the same in other parts of the world. We have an emerging mode of practice that we refer to as public interest architecture, which is a different kind of practice than what we would traditionally use. We're directly preparing our students to do that work, and our students are graduating and not working in a traditional architecture firm. They're working for nonprofits, starting nonprofits, and even in here in the U.S. we have what's called B Corps, which allows a it's a different type of business organization that allows you to do sort of projects directly with the community and make a living doing it, but really to the good of the community, not just solely good for the people who are directly paying for the project. So we've got a number of students that are doing that out there in the world, in the United States today, that have started their own organizations doing this kind of work as professionals in communities around the United States. It's really exciting. It's really, really exciting for us to see our students doing that kind of work. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We have another question. I would like to first start. I would like to how can I say everyone benefits when architects volunteer in non-profit organization. So the idea of Rural Studio is sharing the sweat with the community. So when we say community, I would like to hear your opinions about what it will be if there is an architectural code for the common spaces or the community's collective experience in this collective experience on these common spaces as a rural studio.
So the question, I think the question is about not just the kind of the individual spaces that we build, but actually the community spaces that we build, of how communities come together in those spaces. Is that correct? And how we foster that?
Yeah. But I would like to focus on much more the community. How can I say the common spaces for the community? What's your take on this community spaces for creating the collective memory of this citizenship idea to improve?
Great. I'm gonna see if I can open another presentation and wrong one. And there's some particular projects that may be able to talk about some of that becomes really more clear. So we do work with the community. So Rural Studio doesn't invent any projects at all. We sort of work with elected officials, we work with community organizers and those sorts of things, and the community brings the projects to us, and we work directly with the community. So when we had this idea about the fire station, for instance, that I mentioned, and this is the fire station under construction, these are the 4 students who built it. This is the fire station, once it was built, and again, as an aside, it's a pretty big building. It's built out of wood. To go back to the wood question.
Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
We cannot see the new presentation.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Sorry. I think it's because I opened a new window. Let's see. Okay, there you go. Now you should be able to see that. So this is the fire station. It was under construction. There's the 4 students that are building it. You can actually see that it's a very large building built out of wood, to go back to the wood question. But the community engagement in these projects is really important. And the actual physical space, if you're asking about the physical space, is really important. So this building, while it housed a fire truck, it also became a really critical piece of community infrastructure. There wasn't a new building built in New Bern at this time in 110 years, and so it becoming kind of a community, a place for the community to gather, became really important. So the building is sort of a sign and sort of lantern for the community, but it also became this sort of community meeting space. So here you can see this community meeting. The second building, so here's the fire station to the right. The second building was really because the fire station sort of acted as a community space, suddenly together. Once they had a place to meet, Then all of a sudden they could have town council meetings, they could elect a mayor, they could elect a city council, and they rapidly kind of outgrew the opportunities for the fire station. So then we had a group of students that came in and actually designed and built this building, which was a town hall building, which was actually the community meeting space. So you can look at it as the building, but and here it is in the background on the left. So you can really see that the primary function that it played was to actually create this kind of open public space right in downtown. And that might sound like a funny word to folks that are from more urban areas, but this is downtown New Bern. We have a population of 186 people. It actually gave this kind of public space of civic discourse. Building specifically designed not just as a place for the town to meet, but for a place to vote. This area, I should say, it's in this area that's called the Black Belt. These images are just a few. It shows, that this was where, the center of slave ownership in the country, in the earlier centuries of the country. If you know anything about the civil rights movement in America, here's Selma right in the middle of the state. New Bern's very close. These marches and those sorts of things that happened, and the civil rights were really important. So these issues of voting rights are extraordinarily important. So again, thinking about the kind of civic engagement, the civic responsibility of buildings is really important. So when you see images like this of where people are being beaten by the police because they're trying to vote, and then only 40 years later, 50 years later, this community that never had a place to vote actually now does, is extraordinarily important. So, what architecture looks like and what it acts like, and that it's warm and dry, and just keeping the rain out and the elements out is not all what those are all just sort of side effects of what architecture really does. The social relevance of architecture and the what it stands for and what it allows and what it affords to a community is extraordinarily important. The building is just the side effect of understanding and supporting and nurturing those larger kind of civic structures that we imagine for our communities. And I should show you just because we're sort of talking about it a little bit. This is downtown New Bern. This is our little city. It's pretty rural. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for your answer. There's, I guess, another question here.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, so my question is about architectural representation. Since a construction set is technically a graphic legal contract that comes with a set of assumptions about construction systems, I was wondering, like you said in your presentation for a 20K house that you found the need for an instruction set, which reminded me of something Kyomo once said, which was that he builds his buildings faster than he can draw them. And then he explained his work through a totally different narrative medium. And so if we take the word drawing to actually mean the act of constructing a narrative or a description of a building's construction system, then it seems like we need to redefine as architects and educators what the deliverable of an architectural laborer is, whether it's in the context of the profession or in academia. So I was wondering what your thoughts on representation, the idea of a deliverable, and the idea of explaining your work through a graphic language is.
Great. Thank you. That's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Is the kind of communication of what we're trying to do, whether it's graphic or otherwise, is really important. So one of the things I can only kind of talk about it. It's hard to show in a slide presentation, except maybe I'll put an image up just so it'll give us an opportunity to talk about it. So I sort of showed you this image. These kinds of presentations. I think sometimes I forget if I think sometimes when architecture students see an image like this, they think, oh, that's a formal review, and that happens at the end of the project and those sorts of things. This is actually what happens every single day at Rural Studio. These kinds of discussions. There's never a desk crit. There's never kind of a one-on-one discussion with a student. It's always the students together, all of the students together, no matter what team they're working on, what project they're working on. They're always together, always in communication with each other, with consultants, with clients, and with ourselves. Because they have to use both images and models and mock-ups and prototypes and videos and sort of the whole gamut of communication products to communicate their ideas, and they're doing it every day. Interestingly, the design of the projects actually happens between presentations. So it happens, if we present on Monday to a client, and then we present on Wednesday to because we have this picture of Anderson up to our structural engineer on Wednesday. On Tuesday, the design work is actually happening in the development of the next presentation, where you're it's sort of actually always honing that communication product. And I think it's really important, whether you're sitting at your desk trying to kind of work through a detail of a project or making a more formal drawing of your project. It's both things, right? It's both trying to figure out what you're thinking. We call it, making drawings. We just call thinking out loud with your hands. But it's also trying to communicate that thought that you have to someone else so that they can then connect their thoughts to it, right? And so that sort of mode of communication of constantly making, drawing, making artifacts, showing to people, handling them, in this case, breaking them, understanding them, to try to really get at the questions that you're asking. That's what you do, right? That's really how you think through problems. So being able to draw, being able to make, being able to speak, these are all really, really important tools of an architect. The bigger, I would say, while we're building projects, right, at Rural Studio, that's really not what architects do. Architects don't build projects. We design projects, right? So we, in a real dumb way that we could describe that is we make pictures of buildings, right? That's a really powerful and important role. However, when you think about what you're really doing as an architect, what you're doing as an architect is you're imagining a different future. You're imagining what the future might be like. And then you provide representations of that future to a client, to a homeowner, to an individual, to a community. And you do it in such a way that allows that community choice. It allows that client a decision point. It empowers that homeowner to make a decision about the future that they want to live in. Do they want to live in this future, or do they want to live in that future? And architects' abilities to visualize the future. If you just think about when you make an image of your building, that's not what it is. It's a proposal about how you think the future ought to be, and the systems that building exist within. Those invisible systems that building makes visible. What do you want that future to be like? That's what those, when you talk about sort of communication, that's what architects really do. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. That was a very powerful answer.
So it seems that was our last question, Mr. Smith. Thank you again for your time and for this chance of conversation and presentation. Thank you.
You're really welcome there. Really an opportunity to speak with all of you and for you working through the technical difficulties we have. I hope it's helpful. I hope all of you enjoy your time in Venice. The opportunity to participate in the Biennale is a really, really remarkable experience. And I just hope you're all able to make the best of your time there and you come back being the absolute best you can be at this profession. The profession really relies on you guys. As emerging architects. Last thing I'll share, and then I'll go, is that young folks, I work with them every day, and you often get the kind of a bum rap, to be honest. And I got to tell you, to anybody who's listening that's not a young person, if you don't have an opportunity to work with some of our young architects today, like those that are sitting there in Venice or the ones that we work with, the one thing I can leave you with is the future is in really good hands. Once all of us old folks get out of the way. So thanks for all the work you guys do. Fight the good fight and work every day to be the best at this you can be. There's a lot of work to be done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.